It's just shocking to think that anyone would think, to carry out a shooting is acceptable, but to do it in such a time and place, it's quite hard to conceive of why anybody would do that. Okay, so it's quite a shocking one, really. There was a 23-year-old man called Aseel Al-Essaie, and it was back in February 2017. It's what should have been a very joyful, happy day for his family, because his sister was about to celebrate her engagement with a party that all of the family were attending. Aseel and family members had hired cars. They wanted to, make a big show in support of his sister. And Aseel was on his way to his sister's engagement party, and he was on Daniel Hill in Upperthorpe, and that's quite a relatively quiet residential street. It's quite near a park, and it was in the middle of the day, 1:30 p.m, and Aseel was shot dead with what was described in court as a Dirty Harry style long-barrelled revolver by a gunman who was travelling in a VW Golf car on the road. And Aseel was shot in the shoulder. Well, the gunshot entered on his shoulder and travelled through his heart, and he was killed through a single gunshot wound. And so eventually 3 men were charged in connection with Aseel's murder. They were named Matthew Cohen, Dale Gordon and Keel O'Brien. And they went on trial charged with Aseel's murder back in February 2018, so around a year later. And I think it was quite a complicated one for jurors to understand, because they've been charged on a joint enterprise basis. So what this means is that the prosecution don't have to necessarily determine who it was that fired the fatal gunshot wound. All 3 men were alleged to have been equally involved, equally culpable, because they were all involved with the planning and execution of Aseel's murder. Well, it's quite complicated. They didn't know exactly. The prosecutors, first of all, they don't have to necessarily determine a motive, but it seemed as though there was some sort of feud going on. Jurors were told during the 7-week trial at Sheffield Crown Court that in the weeks leading up to the fatal shooting, Matthew Cohen, so one of the 3 defendants, had slashed Aseel's brother Salah in the face with a pair of scissors. And the senior investigating officer, Detective Chief Inspector Steve Whitaker, said that he believed there was some sort of incident in the weeks running up to the shooting that had been the catalyst, and it was something to do with that. And the three murder accused were all found guilty after the 7-week trial. And I've got a quote here from the judge in the case. Lord Justice Mayle said of the possible motive, "It is not clear why you decided that Aseel had to be shot. We may never know precisely. However, both he and his brother Salah were street dealers in Class A drugs, and there was evidence of previous incidents of violence or threatened violence towards both of them. It is overwhelmingly probable that whatever the precise reason, it had to do with the supply of drugs." But he added, "Whatever may be said about the way in which Aseel earned his living, he was a young man, only 23, much loved by his family, who did not deserve to be shot down in cold blood." And so the court was told that following Aseel's death, the 3 people in the car were assisted by a number of associates, and they attempted to dispose of the evidence. The VW Golf car that was used in the fatal shooting was found burned out a few miles outside of the city centre, and they also attempted to get rid of pieces of evidence that connected them and their movements prior to the shooting being carried out. was quite an extensive investigation. DCI Steve Whittaker said at the time that at that point it was one of the biggest murder investigations that South Yorkshire Police had been involved with for some time. And he said it wasn't just that it was an extensive investigation, but it was quite complicated because not only were the defendants refusing to speak to police, but I think possibly because of the links to crime, witnesses were also reluctant to engage with the police. And he said that to secure the conviction, police had to trawl through hundreds and hundreds of hours of CCTV, ANPR cameras, that they recovered almost 2,000 exhibits, obtained 700 witness statements, and downloaded over 100 devices like phones and that kind of thing. And cell site evidence did form a big part of the case, so it allowed them to trace the movements of those that they believed to be involved with the murder. It can be quite difficult because sometimes you'll have complicated evidence from, say, pathologists, and they're using all of this jargon that you won't necessarily understand. And there's also, in a case like this where you have multiple people with something quite complicated to understand, you have to try and simplify that so, people can have a true sense of what's going on without it being too complicated. And so what will normally happen is that the prosecution will open their case, they will have an opening statement, and it's not necessarily evidence, but it's essentially them outlining what they believe the case to be about, and it's how it opens. And then the prosecutors call their witnesses, bring their evidence, with each witness being cross-examined by defence barristers. And then it's at that point where the defence case is, after the prosecution case is finished, it's at that point that the defence case begins, and defendants are given their opportunity to give evidence if they want to. It's not mandatory, but judges tend to warn that if they choose not to, then it may be something that the jury will hold against them because they've chosen not to, kind of essentially give their side of the story. The jury returned unanimous verdicts, and the defendants all received very lengthy sentences. So they were jailed, they were sentenced to life imprisonment, but they were also received minimum terms of 30 years each, which is considerably longer than your average murder sentence, because the minimum term for those who use guns tends to be a lot more elevated to reflect the serious nature of using guns on the city streets. So essentially what a joint enterprise is when a group of people are thought to be equally connected to a crime. And so it's the idea that they've probably planned together, they've probably set out who would have which role. And with the murder of Aseel Al-Essaie, the prosecutors could not say who it was that fired using the Dirty Harry style gun, who fired the fatal shot that killed Aseel, but they believed that Matthew Cohen was driving, and the VW Golf that was used in the drive-by shooting was registered to him. And I remember during his evidence at the trial that his argument was, who would be so stupid as to use a car that was registered to them to commit, such a serious crime? But the jury obviously rejected that account when they found him and the two others accused of murder guilty. And so, sadly, we do see shootings on Sheffield streets. I think over the last year there have been 2 fatal ones. South Yorkshire Police, I know that they are, trying to put more resources into tackling gun crime on our streets. And in 2020, the force set up an armed crime team in response to what they suggested was a slight increase in the number of firearms discharges. And so that team also covers knife crime as well, but I think, they have been quite focused on trying to bring the number of incidents involving guns on South Yorkshire streets down. And, you do see them coming through court. I think what perhaps some people don't realise is that even possession of a firearm carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in prison, unless there are exceptional circumstances. And, I regularly hear judges saying that, concerns about, fear of reprisals and things like that do not count as exceptional circumstances, because most people who are in possession of firearms tend to be involved with organised crime and gangs and things like that, and so that in itself does not count as an exceptional set of circumstances. Yeah, I think the fact that it was broad daylight, it was 1:30 p.m, it was a Saturday afternoon, and there would have been a lot of people around. There's a big park nearby. In fact, it was previously used to host tram lines. It's a big park, it's well used by families, and any member of the public walking past could potentially have been hurt in the crossfire. And it's just shocking to think that anyone would think to carry out a shooting is acceptable, but to do it in such a time and place, it's quite hard to conceive of why anybody would do that.